call this meeting to order. Secretary, please read the roll. Take the roll.
President Peterson, members of the board, tonight we have 4 board members who are excused from tonight's meeting. Director Carr is excused, Director Garcia is excused, Director Gokul Gandhi.
I'm here. Oh, sorry.
Director Herndon.
Here.
Director Leonard.
Here.
Director O'Halloran.
Also here.
Director Simpson is excused, Director Taylor is excused, President Peterson.
Present.
We have 5 present.
The chair will now ask the secretary to lead us in the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance. Members, please mute your devices.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will now read our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Milwaukee lies on traditional Menominee, Potawatomi, and Ho-Chunk homeland along the southwest shores of Lake Michigan, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes. On this site, the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Connecticut rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's Menominee, Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk, Oneida, and Mohican sovereign nations remain present today. Before we begin tonight's meeting, we have a short announcement regarding the interpretation services for the Spanish-speaking members of our audience. Perhaps that announcement will be made in a...
Llame al 312-626-6799. Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a la Junta Escolar de las Escuelas Públicas de Milwaukee. Si desea escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor llame al 312-626-6799. Nuevamente, 312-626-6799. E introduzca el número de reunión 608-130-5362. Nuevamente, el número de reunión es 608-130-5362. Gracias.
Gracias. Pursuant to the Board Rule 1.06, this meeting is being conducted virtually. Board members may be participating from the Central Services Building. In order to allow as much public participation as possible, this meeting is being broadcast on radio station WYMS 88.9 FM, via live stream on the MPS website, and on the MPS YouTube stream, the links to which may be found on the MPS website on the broadcast page. Before we move to our agenda, the chair will ask that we share in a moment of silence to commemorate the passing of the following members of the MPS community. Linda Lewis, a food service assistant from Obama SCTE, and Giovanni Florentino, a 9th grader at Hamilton High School. We'll now move on to the items of our business on our agenda. As is customary, no public testimony is taken at board meetings. For our listening audience, if you wish to access this evening's agenda items and attachments online, you may do so by visiting milwaukeepublic.ic-board.com. Now let us begin, Madam Secretary. What is our first item of business?
Would be our minutes for approval, and that is the minutes of the October 2021 board meeting.
Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Seeing none, minutes will stand approved. Madam Secretary, are there any reports or communications from the superintendent?
Mr. President, the minutes from October were not attached and will be presented to the board next month. The superintendent does have 2 items on the report for this month, and that is the monthly report with possible action from the superintendent of schools. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Would the superintendent please present the report?
Good evening, President Peterson and members of the board. Keith Posley, Superintendent of Schools. This month's report outlines some of the district's highlights. The districts recognize Native American Heritage Month by acknowledging and sharing resources related to the accomplishments, culture, and history of Native nations. We showcased the launch of the HVAC lab at Obama School of Career and Technical Education, as well as learning labs over at OW Homes. Both of these examples demonstrate students and staff access to modern equipment and technology and hands-on experiences that will better prepare them for future opportunities. As you are aware, children ages 5 to 11 are now eligible for COVID-19 vaccine. With that announcement, we have been hosting vaccine clinics in 12 of our schools along with the Milwaukee Health Department and Children's Wisconsin. This is another tool to provide access to students and family, in addition to helping keep us all safe and healthy. I would like to also recognize Director Herndon, who was recently recognized by the Wisconsin Music Education Association for being a champion for the importance of music in our schools. Thank you, Director Herndon, for advocating for music for our students in Milwaukee Public Schools. For further details, my report is attached for your review. At this time, I will ask David Sola-Farfaric to provide an update related to transportation services. Following David, Adria Matalini will give an update regarding the staff vacancy mandates, as well as hazard pay for secretaries. David.
Thank you, Dr. Posley. President Peterson, members of the board, David Sola-Farfaric, Director of Business and Transportation Services for the district. Today I'm going to talk really briefly, I guess, about the kind of efforts for transportation and getting into the month of November. And I guess I'll start by saying I'm happy to report that as of the first week of November, I think we've officially turned a corner. We have every single run is covered by a regularly assigned driver. So we don't have any open packages. We've got no open routes for the district. And there's a long time coming, so that's good. That does not mean we're not experiencing timing issues, and so we're kind of now, as we kind of hit the second week of November, we're up until this point, we were combining routes. Now we're in effect doing the opposite. We're splitting routes, and we're putting more buses on the road as drivers become cleared. And we're still trying to ramp up our reserve ratio because we have, with maybe some of the uptick of COVID, we've got a higher absenteeism rate still to this day, almost triple what we expect in a typical year. So that volatility does create some service-related issues through this week. I'll kind of maybe transition over to the parent contracts because I know maybe there's some questions related to that. So as of the third week, this last week, we issued 1,114 contracts. It takes a little bit of time to get all that processed because the family's got to return those, and then we've got to benchmark that information against Infinite Campus. We, at this point in time, we expect to expend, as of what has been returned, as of yet, $78,895 for the month of October. So that's just kind of gives you an idea of the expenditures backdating out for those issues. Again, every one of those service-related issues for those contracts have effectively been closed out because all of those families are now on regularly ran bus routes. So I don't expect that number to continue to expand. We are, I think we're still in a position to be offering parent contracts for extenuating circumstances, people who are maybe homeless in really particularly difficult to accommodate situations. And so we negotiate with the resident school district if they're in another school district or with the bureau if they're in some sort of sharing of cost scenario. And we are kind of exploring use of parent contracts for those hard to accommodate situations. But every one of the parent contracts that we have issued was for the month of October. And every one of those families have been reinstated on regularly assigned service. So we don't really expect to have to expend funds for the month of November. related to those parent contracts. We did add one additional bus company. It's actually on an agenda item tonight, CNS Transportation, very limited capacity. Many of, maybe some longtime folk will remember them as Atlas Transit. So they have been under new management, but we're slowly integrating them into our system to help us diversify the fleet. And at that point, I could end my report and answer any questions you might have.
Does the board have any questions or comments? Director Giliganti.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for your persistence through this. You have managed this with calmness and resiliency, and I know it's been crazy, so thank you for getting us through this. And hopefully now we just know, if in case there's something else like this in the future, which I hope not. I just want you to know that.
Thank you, Director Gokugandi. Any other comments? Yes, Director Hernan.
Yes, I certainly would like to say thank you, and I appreciate all the assistance you provided to me as I called you with constituent transportation issues and your patience. It is much appreciated, and I haven't been getting any more of those calls, so kudos to you. Thank you.
Comment? Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. So I'm really, obviously, I'm thrilled to hear that all our routes are staffed with regular drivers and that you've been able to work through the issues. And that, so I just wanted to go back to at the beginning of the year, there were still some people who were requesting yellow buses that, because we had made that shift in the high school. And so are those issues resolved, or are we still working on those issues as well?
Administration.
Director O'Halloran, President Peterson, members of the board, we have not forgotten about those appeals. And so we, in the process of September, October, have processed a portion of those appeals. It's been slower than we have anticipated. And in fact, just last week, we kind of talked about reinvigorating the conversation and really trying to, as we add bus routes, being strategic to the high schools in particular, because they had those problems with the transition into that county transit zone. So we have not exhausted all of those appeals. And of course, I can send some reports back to the board as needed to kind of update those pieces. But absolutely, typically in a normal year, the first month of September is very difficult for us to convene an appeal committee anyways. So we are not that far behind. We're really about a month behind in our appeal process, which obviously to the family is very significant. But from a procedural standpoint, I don't think it's going to take too long for us to get back to business as usual with respect to the appeals as well.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Any other comments or questions by the board? Okay, Madam Secretary, what is the next item from the superintendent?
President Peterson, members of the board, Adrian Madeline, Chief Human Resources Officer. I'm going to take a moment tonight to provide a brief update on the district's vaccine mandate. I'm pleased to announce that as of this afternoon, 10,289 employees have complied with the vaccine mandate. This equates to a 90.4% compliance rate. Keep in mind that this covers all district staff, including part-time staff and LTEs. When pared down to just full-time staff, the compliance rate is 93.3%. In total, 944 employees have submitted accommodation requests, and 9,345 have submitted proof of vaccination. The 9,345 staff that submitted proof of vaccination equates to an 82% vaccination rate among our staff. And this equates to well above the 58.9% vaccine rate that the city of Milwaukee has for adults. So that's definitely something that we want to applaud. And I want to end on that note and give a big thank you to all of our staff for stepping up to the plate and making sure all of our buildings are safe learning and working environments. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? Director Gokugandi.
When we talked about vaccine mandates last time, we were going back and forth about contractors who come in our buildings or organizations that have contact with our students. are we counting, are we asking them to see what their vaccination status is?
Administration?
Director Peterson, Director Gokul Gandhi, Adrian Maddaleni, Chief Human Resources Officer. Yes, we have continually had conversations with our contractors that come into our building. A number of them, frankly, have worked with us to try and mirror our vaccination policy with theirs. In particular, thinking about City Year. We've had a great relationship in talking to them. They wanted to know, okay, how are you doing your accommodation requests? What are you looking at? I want to also mention our university partners when it comes to student teachings. They've done the same thing. They've asked, like, what is your policy? How are you doing it procedure-wise? And so we've been trying to be consistent, so we're having that constant communication. We also, to be honest, we've worked with other vendors where it's a little bit more challenging, and Goodwill Talent Bridge, they're working and doing everything they can to get their staff vaccinated, but I know it is a challenge and a work in progress, but we're continuing to have those conversations as we move forward, and hopefully, as things may happen at the federal level, the mandate will be some more commonplace and that we won't be an issue here.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Okay. Any other comments from the administration?
Yes, President Peterson, members of the board, now I want to give a brief update on the secretary hazard pay item. As you recall, in September of 2021, the board approved hazard pay for secretaries that worked in person during the pandemic, specifically spring of 2020. And you guys moved forward to pay them in the same manner that we paid other staff that received hazard pay during that time. I'm here to provide a brief update on how the implementation has been going. A survey has gone out to all principals and supervisors of secretaries. The survey specifically asks if there's been a secretary that's worked in person in their building. If so, what specific days did they work? And based on that information, we will move forward with providing pay to the secretaries. As of today, we have 123 responses, and there are 21 that are outstanding, and I've been in the process of making phone calls to make sure we can get those finalized and in place so that we can get payments moving forward. The goal is to have payment to secretaries on the December 10th paycheck. And we will continue to move forward, and we understand there may be some concerns that secretaries have, questions about what's covered, what's not. I am happy to answer any of those questions with the secretaries, have reached out to their union rep to answer any questions, and we can resolve any issues we have concerning payment.
Any questions or comments by the board? Okay, any other reports from the administration?
No, that completes our reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, what is the next item from the superintendent?
The next item is action on a request for a closed session relative to a report with possible action regarding a district safety drill as required by the Wisconsin State Statutes 118.07, Parent 4, Parent CP, and other associated requirements. The recommendation is that the board retire to closed session to consider this item.
Madam Secretary, if there are no objections, we'll defer this item to the end of the meeting.
Seeing none, so noted.
Okay. Madam Secretary, are there any reports and communications from the Office of Board Governance?
Yes, Mr. President. There are 3 items from the Office of Board Governance tonight. The first item is action on a request to retire to closed session regarding litigation in which the board is or is likely to become involved. The recommendation is that the board retire to closed session to consider this item.
Madam Secretary, we will defer this item to the end of the meeting as well, assuming no objection. Madam Secretary, what is the next item?
The next item is item number 2, which is an information and update on the development of an election district apportionment plan for the election of the members of the Milwaukee Board of School Directors pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes 119.08, Parent 1. This is an informational item and is being presented for discussion purposes.
Would the board clerk please present the report?
Yes, Mr. President. The report is before you relative to an update on the district's redistricting plan. I have outlined in the report the actions taken by the city of Milwaukee relative to the aldermanic districts. And the city is scheduled to complete its redistricting by the end of the month, which starts the 60-day timeline by state statute for the Milwaukee Board of School Directors to begin its process and complete a district apportionment plan for the Milwaukee Board of School Directors board districts. And so what I've outlined in the report is the steps taken by the city relative to giving public hearing. There are 2 dates that are listed for public hearing relative to the district's maps, and I've also included a link for anyone who would like to attend, and a schedule for the board completing its process relative to redistricting.
Could you tell us the dates of those public hearings? So the listening audience has those.
So noted. So the city's dates for its hearings are currently scheduled for November 22nd at 1:30, and that is a meeting that will be held at City Hall in room 301B. The next meeting that the city will have in which it is scheduled to consider for possible action their district maps on Tuesday, November 23rd, Tuesday, November 23rd. And at that time, the council is expected to take action in which, if action is taken, those maps will be forwarded to the mayor for his sign-off. And once the mayor signs off, the board then will begin its process. So working very closely with the city clerk and members of the Legislative Reference Bureau, we've come up with a timeline for the board to ensure that we meet the statutory timeline for board members to take a look at maps, have public hearing on the redistricting process, and then begin making sure that the process can be completed within that 60-day timeline. So in December of 2021, the Milwaukee Board of School Directors was scheduled to adopt a plan and schedule relative to redistricting. In December of 2021, the board is also scheduled to have a public hearing on the proposed plans. In December, late December, early January, given the holiday schedule, the board is also scheduled to meet with the Legislative Reference Bureau on the individual district maps. So board members will have a chance to hear from their constituents and then give input on their individual district maps based on the maps that will be drawn up by the Legislative Reference Bureau of the city. In January of 2022, there will be a publication of the maps that the board has considered, given the input of their constituents and the draft from the Legislative Reference Bureau, and those maps will be published for public input. And after that point, there will be a public hearing for members of the public to address what has been published relative to the board's proposed reapportionment and redistricting plan. The board is expected in January, mid-February, to adopt the actual redistricting plan.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Committee members, do you have any comments or questions? Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. And thank you for that overview. I know there's going to be that town hall this Friday with Alderman Hamilton. I can't attend, but if there's recordings, I'll try to pay attention so that we can incorporate whatever feedback they get on the city side and incorporate it into our process. For the December public hearing, do we know when that date will be selected? So if people are particularly interested, they can make sure to mark it on their calendar?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, our process will be very specific and definitive once we have that date in which the city has adopted its plan. That is when the 60-day timeline it starts the board's clock on redistricting, and so as soon as we have that approval, we will be moving forward. I have been working very closely with the city clerk and members of the Legislative Reference Bureau to understand where they are in the process at every moment. In fact, we just spoke yesterday about the dates that are proposed here to ensure that we could meet the statutory 60-day timeline. So walking along in that process, the minute we have the mayor's sign off, our dates become very definitive.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
No.
Okay, seeing none. What is the next item? What is the next item?
The next item is item number 3, and that is the monthly report with possible action on the legislative activities affecting MPS. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
And would the board clerk please present the report?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mr. Chris Thiel is here to give the monthly report.
Thank you. Mr. Thiel.
Thank you, Dr. Mann. Thank you, President Peterson, members of the board. Chris Thiel, Office of Governmental Relations. Just a quick update, one at the federal level and one at the state level. At the federal level, as we've been talking about over the last several months, we have had passage of the infrastructure bill, and that was signed into law earlier this week. And we've been discussing the Build Back Better program that President Biden put out and has been with us all summer. So the news today, and the good news, frankly, is that they've gone through a scoring process with the Congressional Budget Office to really determine how much the Build Back Better package costs, and specifically of importance to us, how much will the items related to public education and K-12 education cost? And the good news is that the costs have come in line and actually slightly under predictions. And the reason that is good news is because we therefore, hopefully, will not have to have a conversation about trimming anything that's in that package out. So we may see as soon as tomorrow, Friday, a vote on the House side for the Build Back Better plan. It will then go over to the Senate. For those who have been following this process, the Senate doesn't have any room to spare, and I'm sure we will see some negotiation and reforming of the package on the Senate side that may take hopefully not too many weeks. But then once that is done, it will come back over to the House side, and hopefully we'll see passage sooner than later. So good to see movement, and good to see that, at least at this point, the items we're interested in are still there. At the state level, this is communication, it's an update and more of a communication process, I think, because as we've talked about over the last several months, since the state budget was finalized, we've discussed the fact that the state of Wisconsin has $1.7 billion in a rainy day fund and an additional $2 billion unallocated, essentially sitting on a shelf in Madison. And what's become increasingly apparent, and what is difficult to communicate, however, is that while on the one hand we're talking about federal funding, we've had a referendum and we're still going through that process, but the state, since the early 90s again, has traditionally provided a per pupil increase that generally has matched the rate of inflation. It hasn't been perfect, but generally we've seen that per pupil increase. This process was created under a Republican governor, Tommy Thompson, but in this last state budget, there is no revenue limit per pupil increase. Our referendum was built on an assumption that there would be an increase, and most districts, not most, all districts across the state budget and do long-term planning with the assumption that there will be at least a $200 or so per pupil increase. What we're hearing more and more from our neighboring districts is that we are going to be running into a situation across the state of Wisconsin, especially with costs going up in multiple areas, whether this is going to be temporary, that we have this cost increase, or more permanent. The economists are discussing that. But the reality is, in the near term, that inflationary increase is not there. And we're looking at cost increases in a number of areas that are making it more difficult and more expensive to run school districts. If we don't see a per pupil increase, we know already in talking to neighboring districts that they're already in a communication process with their communities, trying to help folks understand that although you may have heard about this federal money, you may have heard about all these other items out there, without that regular, sustainable, per pupil increase, the basic running of a school district becomes difficult, and the conversations at the next budget meetings across the state of Wisconsin are ones that people are really beginning to struggle with, because it could mean cuts, potentially. So this is an update to say, all is not lost. I think we're gonna have to push for a special session after the new year to see if we can communicate effectively and get the legislature to provide that per pupil increase, and I'm sure they'll be hearing from all districts. But just want to, again, communicate this to the board and communicate this to the public, that because it's so complex and because there are so many moving parts, we're probably going to have this discussion a couple of times, just to make sure people are understanding why boards are making the decisions that they may have to in the near future. So happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Does the committee have any questions or comments? Director Leonard?
Okay, so all this stuff is swirling in my head. It actually has been for a long time. So out of curiosity, my experience is working on the political end of it to get the people of the city of Milwaukee to get involved has been difficult. There's just a sense of apathy. It's something that gets into the weeds. But in other communities, just from your experience, from talking to people from other parts of the state of Wisconsin, how are they doing with generating more interest from their communities?
President Peterson, Director Leonard, I'd say they're in the early stages, even based on conversations this week. I think what administrations and school boards feel like they need to do is to begin to document now and have statements of record, so that they're not in a position down the line where they're making difficult budgetary decisions if the state does not come through. And people say, well, why didn't you tell us? So I think business managers, school districts, boards are in the communicating this moment. Just from the political calendar, I think we're heading into the holiday season. After the new year, typically there's maybe a 2 to 3 month sprint before the end of the session. And the legislature could call itself into session to solve this problem. The governor could call a special session to address this issue. But it's just one of those moments where, even with the way the federal money came down, and people have made, as we all know, a point of focusing on Milwaukee sometimes, but the general conversation about one-time funding versus sustainable funding, and the fact that we didn't adhere to the basic sustainability practice that the state has done for 20 plus years, that conversation had been overwhelmed by the federal funding conversation. But I think the need now is to really help people understand, on the sustainability front, on the responsibility that the state has front, here's what's happening. So it's that we're in that early stage of communication, and hopefully that understanding then leads to action. But we're very early, I would say.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Seal. Madam Secretary, what is the next item?
The next item on tonight's agenda would be the reports and communications from the Office of Accountability and Efficiency. And the first item would be the monthly report. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Would the Office of Accountability and Efficiency please present the report?
Thank you, President Peterson. Matt Chasen, Office of Accountability and Efficiency. That report is before you. I take this opportunity every year to say this, but I mean it every year when I say it. And that is that we approach the Thanksgiving season. I just like to share that I am, in fact, very grateful that I get to collaborate with this board, this administration, and this Office of Board Governance in moving the mission of the district forward. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? Okay, seeing none. Madam Secretary, what is the next item?
The next item is Item number 2, action on a request to retire to executive session in order to consider information received in accordance with Administrative Policy 6.35, whistleblower protections. The recommendation is that the board retire to executive session to consider this item.
Madam Secretary, we will defer this item to the end of the meeting if there's no objection by the board. Seeing none. It is referred. Deferred. Okay. Madam Secretary, what is the next item of business?
The next item of business is the reports of the independent hearing officers of the Milwaukee Board of School Directors, and that would be on the student expulsions. The independent hearing officers report of the board.
Okay. Administration.
Chair Peterson
Mr.
and
Chair?
members.
Given that this is an item that would typically be considered in closed session, if they would have any questions, at this point, we would need a motion on these reports of the independent hearing officers.
Okay, so we need a motion to accept, modify, or reject the reports of the independent hearing officers of the dates and times listed in our agenda. Is there a motion?
Chair, so moved.
A motion by Director Herndon. We need a second for that motion. Is there a second? Director Leonard. Okay, will the secretary please call the roll?
On Director Herndon's motion to accept the reports of the independent hearing officers, seconded by Director Leonard.
Okay,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
please call the
Director
roll.
Leonard, do you have a question or? No. No, okay. On the motion as read into the record, Director Gokul Gandhi,
Aye.
Director Herndon,
Aye.
Director Leonard,
Aye.
Director O'Halloran,
Aye.
President Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes, the motion passes.
Okay, we will now have the reports of the standing committees. Since the public hearing was given at the committee meetings, and the board, as is customary, will not be giving public hearing on these reports this evening. Madam Secretary, what is the first report? Yes. Is there a question?
I just had a general question. Were we allowed to ask questions of the aggregate data? Okay, may I?
Would it be permissible, Madam Secretary, for us to go back and allow board members to ask that question, those questions? Okay. Thank you for asking that question, Director Gokul Gandhi. Would you like to ask a question to the administration?
I would.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
I am a little bit concerned that just in these last few months, we've had 61 incidences. And I just would like to hear from you. Are you worried about this number? What are we do? You know, it's been a tough year for our students, for our staff. And this really concerns me. And so I would just like some context and some explanation on why this number is so large.
Administration.
President Peterson and members of the board, one of the things that I would say, yes, the numbers are somewhat upward, but, and I shared with the principals just earlier this month, that we are seeing things that we usually see in March in November. And we are doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that we are working with our young people, alternatives to suspensions, making sure that we are doing counseling, supporting our young people. And I would just truly say we are really seeing the last 17 months of children not being in school. You know, they've skipped some years of being out of, well, a year, or a little over a year of being out. And that nurturing and things that go on at the school level hadn't happened for a year and being in school. So a lot of those things that are what we are seeing, as well as our circles and restorative practices and things of this nature that we're trying to wrap safety nets around our young people to make sure that they're successful. And I even have staff have commented to me that You know, this is one of the toughest years that they have had, and we are seeing that on a daily basis. But we're going to continue to work along with our young people, continue to work along with our staff, look for all type of alternatives towards suspensions, and also opportunities to counsel and communicate with our young people to make sure that we don't get to this stage.
Follow-up question? Yes, Director Gokul Gandhi.
And do we have any proactive or preventative measures to make sure that, you know, in the next few months, this number isn't 120? Because that would be, if you're saying that we are seeing behaviors in March that we see now, I'm worried when we get to February, you know, where are we going to be? And so how are we kind of doing extra nurturing, or what are we doing to mitigate the doubling of this number?
One of the, Chair Peterson, members of the board, one of the big things that we're doing is social emotional learning, working with our young people, making sure that we have those breaks on a daily basis to be able to decompress, de-escalate, talk through various things. Also looking at situations where we can also give our young people a walk or to work with another staff member. You know, looking at what we can do around activities and groups with our students to build those safety nets. We're looking at all of those avenues that we also talked about, restorative practices and restorative circles, to also have that peer-to-peer type of support, looking at our Black and Latino male office going into schools, being proactive and working so that we don't have the things that we see. Also, we have redeployed staff from here at Central Office to be extra hands and ears and support within our schools on a daily basis, and that has been truly amazing. So being able to be out there to communicate, because once you see a problem getting ready to happen, you can always de-escalate those problems, and having enough staff is one of those things to be able to make sure we do that, and fresh eyes, fresh hands, and fresh hearts in our buildings to make sure that we're communicating with our young people.
Director Gokul Gandhi,
I
follow-up?
just have one last comment, President Peterson. You know, during the pandemic, we took one day a week to regroup and have conversations virtually, right? Just to make sure children were getting the help they needed. And I think maybe we revisit that. Maybe we take one day a week to do some social emotional learning instruction and just help our kids reacclimate, talk about their feelings, talk about readjusting. You know, I think that we have an opportunity to do things differently, because I am very concerned about this number doubling in January, and that's not okay to me. So, you know, maybe we can have some more discussion about what that looks like.
Administration.
President Peterson and members of the board, we have started to regather our teams that we had with the Roadmap to Readiness to come back together, health and safety team, a number of those teams to come together to kind of talk about those type of things that is on the agenda as we speak.
Thank you. And I know, just talking to some principals, that there's individual schools are doing things, you know, that's in accord with their student needs and also to their staff allocation, so that they can move people around and do it properly. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Director Leonard.
I've been trying to sort of grasp this from my experiences as a teacher at MPS, and also having done administration. From your experiences, are we more quickly expelling students? I understand for weapons charges, but I'm looking at some of the others, some of the chronic disruption, one for alcohol, things like that. I'm sort of surprised that we're expelling them versus using other methods, and I'm just curious as to your thoughts on this. Just sort of surprised by it, I guess.
Administration.
President Peterson and members of the board, I will say that it's with great tolerance now than in the past. And I mean that staff and administration is going over and beyond. And we don't just bring children up to do expulsions or suspensions or any of those kinds of things. Not at all. So this is not just the idea of people not blending in and working with our young people. They are going over and beyond to do everything they can to make sure that child stays in school.
Any follow-up? Other comments or questions? Any other comments from the administration? Thank you very much. Okay. We'll now have the reports of the standing committees. Since public hearing was given at the committee meetings, the board, as is customary, will not be giving public hearing on these reports this evening. Madam Secretary, what is the first report?
The first report is that of the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel. Item number 2, action on recommended administrative appointments, promotions, reassignments, and reclassifications, salary increases and decreases, and limited term employment contracts exceeding 60 days has been set aside at the request of the administration. Item number 5, action on a request to approve the prevailing wage rates has been set aside as approval requires a 2/3 affirmative vote. Item 12, report with possible action regarding a school safety plan as required by Wisconsin statutes 118.07, parent 4, parent B, parent M, and other associated requirements have been set aside as it was forwarded to the board without recommendation.
Do any board members wish any other items from this committee to be set aside? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, what's the next report?
The next report is that of the Committee on Legislation, Rules, and Policies. No items of this report have been set aside for separate consideration.
Do any board members wish any items to be set aside from this committee? Madam Secretary, what's the next report?
The next report is that of the Committee on Parent and Community Engagement. No items of this report have been set aside for separate consideration.
Do any board members wish any items to be set aside from this committee? Seeing none, we'll move on. Madam Secretary, what's the next report?
The next report is that of the Committee on Student Achievement and School Innovation. No items of this report have been set aside for separate consideration.
Do any board members wish any items to be set aside from this committee? Seeing none, I'd like to ask for a motion and action on motion for the balance of the reports of the standing committees. Director Herndon has made the motion. Is there a second to that motion? Director Leonard, thank you. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
On Director Herndon's motion to approve the balance of the standing reports, seconded by Director Leonard. Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Herndon.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
President Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, what is the next item?
The next item, Mr. President, we are now back to the items that were set aside from the committees. And the first item that was set aside is item number 2 from the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel. And that is action on recommended administrative appointments, promotions, reassignments, and reclassifications, salary increases and decreases, and limited term employment contracts exceeding 60 days. This item has been set aside at the request of the administration. Your committee recommends that the board approve the administration's recommendation.
Okay, administration.
President Peterson, members of the board, Adria Maddaleni, Chief Human Resources Officer. We are setting this aside because there was a clerical error on one of the salaries that we want to bring forward and correct for the record.
Okay. Do we identify that clerical error?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, yes, the position should be stated and the correct salary.
Yes, okay. Sorry about that. The position will be the Director 1, Gender and Identity Inclusion appointment. The correct salary is $93,386 instead of $90,386.
Okay. Any comments or questions by the board? Seeing none, the committee's recommendation was that we approve this recommendation. Do we have to, we take a vote on it now?
Mr. Chair, I believe that the administration is asking the board to approve the item as amended in the attachment to this item.
Okay, could I have a motion to that effect? Director O'Halloran, seconded by Director Gokul Gandhi. Thank you. Madam Secretary, could you please call the roll?
I'm sorry, that was Director O'Halloran and seconded by Director Gokul Gandhi?
I'll slow
Okay.
down. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. On Director O'Halloran's motion, seconded by Director Gokul Gandhi, to approve item number 2 of the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel, and is approval of the recommended administrative appointments as amended in the attachments to this item. Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Herndon.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
And President Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes. The motion passes.
Thank you very much. What is the next item that's set aside?
Mr. President, is there a statement to be made relative to the administrative appointments?
Oh, Director Herndon. Go for it.
Okay.
Oh, jeez.
Continuing the spirit of Director Phillips.
And Herndon and Gokul
Just
Gandhi, we're all
We
together.
run a tight ship here, folks. Yes, continuing the tradition of Director Phillips, we just, on behalf of the Board of Directors of Milwaukee Public Schools, thank you for bringing your talents to serve the children of Milwaukee Public Schools. Go forth and do great things.
Thank you very much. And thank you for helping me out there. Okay, Madam Secretary, next item?
The next item that was set aside is from the Report on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel, and that is the action on a request to approve the prevailing wage rates. And the committee recommends approval of the administration's recommendation. This item was set aside as the approval requires a 2/3 affirmative vote.
Any comments or a motion, perhaps? Okay, and we need a 2/3 vote, so we need a motion to move this forward. Yes, Director Gokul Gandhi.
I move we approve the prevailing wages.
Is there a second? Director Herndon. Any other conversation about this? Madam Secretary, could you please take the roll?
On Director Gokul Gandhi's motion, seconded by Director Herndon, to approve the prevailing wage rates. Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Herndon.
Director Herndon? Director Herndon? Vote. It's vote on it. Return to vote, yes.
Aye.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Director Herndon, is your mic on? Okay, great, thank you. Director Leonard,
Aye.
Director O'Halloran,
Aye.
and President Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes, the motion passes. Mr. President,
Yes.
before we move on to the next item, I want to alert the board that I am double-checking the language on the prevailing wage rate to ensure that the language says 2/3 majority vote. And I believe that it is of the board's membership. And without 2/3 of the board being present, this action would need to come back before the board for further consideration.
Okay. So we'll put that on the agenda for next month.
So noted. Mr. Chair, I just want to alert the board and members of the public that in the event that there's a timing issue relative to approving the prevailing wage rate that requires the board, that requires approval before the next board meeting, I will work with the board chair to call a special meeting.
Okay,
Thank you.
so what is our next item?
The next item set aside is from the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel, item number 12. The report with possible action regarding a school safety plan as required by Wisconsin State Statutes 118.07, Parent 4, Parent BM, and other associated requirements. This item has been set aside as it was forwarded to the board without recommendation. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This item was a notice for closed session. Given that the information in this report is closely related to the information in the superintendent's communication item that was previously deferred, it may be prudent to defer this item to the end of the meeting as well.
If there's no objections, we will defer this item to the end of the meeting.
So
Being
noted.
no objections. Madam Secretary, are there any items of regular business?
Yes, Mr. President, we do have two items of regular business. The first item is the reports of the board's delegate. The first report is that of the board's delegate to the Title I District Advisory Council.
So that report is before you. If you have any questions, feel free. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Madam Secretary, what's the next report?
Mr. Chair, the next report is the report of the board's delegate to the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. And while there is no formal report, I would like to alert the public and those board members who were unable to attend that there was a formal, a meeting with the Region 14 delegate for WASB, and that many board members attended, was able to meet with Mr. Ashley, the executive director of WASB, to ask questions and to get information about the services that WASB offers. And that was held just prior to this meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Secretary, what's the next item of regular business?
The next item would be the monthly report of the president of the Milwaukee Board of School Directors.
And that is before you. If you have any questions, please ask. Okay. Madam Secretary, are there any items of unfinished business from the prior meetings of the board?
Mr. Chair, we have no unfinished business.
Madam Secretary, are there any items of new business for referral to the committee?
Yes, Mr. President, we do have action on proposed amendments to the various board rules in accordance with Board Rule 1.11, amendments to the rules.
This item will be referred to the Committee on Legislation, Rules, and Policies. Madam Secretary, are there any communications for referral to committee?
Mr. President, we have no communications and we have no resolutions for referral this month.
Okay, then we'll skip that question. And Madam Secretary, what is the next item?
The next item puts us back to the items that were previously deferred.
Members, we are asked to go into closed session on these items for the sake of efficiency. I will entertain a motion to consider all these items together in one closed session. Before I hear the motion, Madam Secretary, would you please remind us of the items that have been deferred?
Yes, Mr. President. Those items are, one, communication number 3 from the superintendent of schools, action on a request to require to close session relative to a report with possible action regarding a district safety drill as required by the Wisconsin statutes 118.07, Parent 4, Parent C, Parent P, and other associated requirements. We will also be considering item number 12 of the report of the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel, the report with possible action regarding a school safety plan as required by Wisconsin statutes 118.07, Parent 4, Parent B, Parent M, and other associated requirements. The third item would be the communication number 1 from the Office of Board Governance, action on a request to retire to closed session on retired to closed session on litigation in which the board is or is likely to become involved. And then the final communication would be communication number 2 from the Office of Accountability and Efficiency, action on a request to retire to executive session in order to consider information received in accordance with administrative policy 6.35 whistleblower protections.
May I have a motion to consider these items together? Director O'Halloran,
So moved.
second. Director Gokul Gandhi? Seconded by Director Gokul Gandhi. Madam Secretary, could you please take the roll?
Mr. Chair, just for procedural purposes, if you could read the exceptions that allows the board to go into closed session.
Okay, I'll entertain the exceptions, the pursuant to Wisconsin statutes, you're talking 19.85, parent 1, parent C, which allows governmental body to retire to executive sessions for the purpose of considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. And 19.85, parent 1, parent D, which allows government body to hold a closed session to consider strategy for crime detection or prevention. 19.85, 1G, which allows a governmental body to hold a closed session, confer with legal counsel who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved. And 19.851F, which allows a governmental body to retire to closed session in order to consider financial, medical, social, and personal histories or disciplinary data or specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigation.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much for that. So those are the exceptions that allows the board to go into closed session on the items that I have previously read into the record. The board will be considering both the communication from the superintendent relative to the safety drills, as well as the report from the item that was set aside from accountability, finance, and personnel. So relative to the safety drills, the board is required to take action. So if the board chooses to go into executive session with the vote, the board would come out to take action on that item.
Okay. Do we already have a motion to go into executive session, I believe, from Director O'Halloran, seconded by Director Gokul Gandhi?
Mr. Chair, we do not have a motion at this time.
Okay,
That would be to go into closed session on all of the items together. What I explained into the record is that the board's action on the safety drills, which was the superintendent's communication number 2, and the item number 12 from accountability, finance, and personnel would be considered together, as the items are directly related. So what I'm asking right now is that the board, one, take action to hear both of those items together, and hear and consider both of those items together, and 2, go into executive session for all 4 items read into the record.
Director O'Halloran, could you shape a motion like that?
So moved. I move we consider the 2 items and take action collectively together on those 2 items and retire to closed session to consider all 4 items as previously stated by the board clerk.
Director Gokul Gandhi.
Second?
So noted.
Madam Secretary, please read the roll.
On Director O'Halloran's motion to consider communication number 2 from the superintendent, action on a request to go into closed session relative to a report with possible action regarding a district safety drill, and the report from the Accountability and Finance and Personnel Committee, item number 12, to consider both of those items together, and to retire to executive session to consider all 4 items as read into the record. Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Herndon.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
And Chair Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes, the motion passes.
The board will now retire to closed session to discuss the items previously announced by the secretary. The board may return to open session to take action on matters discussed in closed session. If no action will be taken, the board will adjourn from closed session. Madam Secretary, please note the time.
So noted.
session. Madam Secretary, we will be taking action on certain items discussed in closed session. Would you please announce those items?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Superintendent's Communication Number 2, action on a request for a closed session relative to a report with possible action regarding a district safety drill as required by Wisconsin statutes 118.07, parent 4, parent C, parent P, and other associated requirements, and the report of the Accountability, Finance, and Personnel, item number 12, report with possible action regarding a school safety plan as required by Wisconsin State Statutes 118.07, parent 4, parent B, parent M, and other associated requirements.
Thank you. What is the pleasure of the board with respect to these items? Director Leonard.
I move approval of the Superintendent's Communication Number 2 regarding a district safety drill and item number 12 from the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel regarding a school safety plan inclusive of approval of the administration's request to repair district safety equipment.
Do I have a second for that? So the motion's been made by Director Leonard. Do I have a second for that? Dr. Halloran, you second it? Thank you. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
On Director Leonard's motion, seconded by Director O'Halloran, which moves approval of the Superintendent's Communication Number 2 regarding a district safety drill, and item number 12 from the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel regarding a school safety plan, inclusive of approval of the administration's request to repair district safety equipment. Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Herndon.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
And President Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, are there any other items before us tonight?
Mr. Chair, that was the last item on tonight's agenda.
Thank you. This meeting is now adjourned.